Atwood, thank you. As we've been reporting, President Trump spoke at the United Nations General Assembly Tuesday. There, he called out Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro and accused his regime of bankrupting the country through its socialist policies.
Currently, we are witnessing a human tragedy, as an example, in Venezuela. More than 2 million people have fled the anguish inflicted by the socialist Maduro regime and its Cuban sponsors. Not long ago, Venezuela was one of the richest countries on earth. Today, socialism has bankrupted the oil-rich nation and driven its people into abject poverty.
But as the Trump administration ramps up its criticism of Latin America, according to McClatchy, diplomats say the region's leaders are left wondering who exactly they should talk to. The author of that article, Franco Ordoñez, is a White House correspondent for McClatchy News. He joins me now from Washington. Franco, thank you for being with us. You wrote about this ongoing brain drain at the White House and State Department of Latin American diplomats and specialists. At this point, how far up the food chain do these important vacancies go?
They go extremely high up the food chain. We're talking the top people at the White House and at State Department who are in charge of Latin America policy. People like Juan Cruz, who just left at the National Security Council, Kimberly Breyer, who is supposed to take over for leading Western Hemisphere affairs at the State Department, has been nominated but has yet to be put in office. So there's a lot of empty positions that still need to be filled. Not to mention, as you point the brain drain, there's just a half dozen top leaders who used to be on the 7th floor of the State Department who are no longer there. So they're, Latin American diplomats are literally asking me, what do you think's going to happen? Who's coming next? Who am I going to talk to? And are they going to care about my issues?
So, Franco, during a news conference earlier this month, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo acknowledged the vacancies and essentially said, I'm on it. But why is it taking so long to fill these spots?
It's a great question. I mean, part of it has to do with Congress not taking the steps to confirm them. But my sources on the Hill say a lot of the positions that President Trump has nominated, and there's still many who have not been nominated. Those who have been nominated aren't necessarily qualified. They have asked questions about these people. At least a half dozen people who haven't been nominated have backtracked after being questioned about their backgrounds and their experience in these areas. But a lot of it has to do with the president hasn't nominated these individuals. And frankly, prior to Pompeo, Secretary Tillerson really tore through the State Department, allowed about 60% of top officials to leave the State Department. Those positions went unfilled. And there were a lot of people who simply just did not want to work for this administration anymore. And they left on pretty challenging terms.
Well, President Trump hasn't visited Latin America since taking office. He was the first U.S. president to skip the Summit of the Americas in April, and it's my understanding Latin American leaders were pretty upset about that. Is Latin America simply just not a priority for this administration?
That's certainly what my sources are telling me. That certainly seems to be the case. I'm talking about ambassadors like John Feely, who served under who served under Trump for 14 months, said it is very clear that President Trump is not seeing Latin America as a priority. It's not only Latin American diplomats who don't know who to talk to in Washington. It's U.S. diplomats in those countries who do not know how to talk to. Feely, again, said he received maybe once or twice he got instructions from the Trump administration on what to do. I should say that in regards to not going to the summit, the Trump administration says there were significant circumstances. Syria had just used chemical weapons, and the administration needed to deal with that. That said, my sources tell me that Trump had to be pushed and prodded to go to even consider going to the summit. And there are a lot of questions whether he will go to the G20 in Argentina next month, or pardon me, in November.
And so, Franco, some of the consequences of all of this are what? That U.S. interests are simply not being represented when Latin American leaders are making important policy decisions. Is that right?
Exactly. I mean, the United States, the president, Donald Trump, has been saying over and over, raising warnings about China infiltrating Latin America, infiltrating the world, and taking over technology, energy, and really taking over diplomatic leadership of the world. Well, when I talk to these diplomats, they tell me, look, it's true. China is in town. They're building stuff. They're taking influence, but there's no one from the United States who's running interference. There's no one who's stepping in and say, hey, wait a minute, why don't you do this instead? Here's what the United States has to offer. So the people are not in place to kind of step up and say, hey, we want to be competitive, despite the Trump administration's rhetoric.
Is there a U.S. ambassador for Mexico who's been named yet?
Not yet, not yet. Roberta Jacobson was there, brought in by the Obama administration, left on challenging terms in the Trump administration, and my sources in Mexico are very angry that there hasn't even been someone nominated. And clearly this is a big issue. You know, we've all heard about Jared Kushner in the White House and his relations with the foreign minister of Mexico, but look, there's going to be a new president in Mexico in just a few months. Those people that they have relations with, Jared Kushner and the Trump administration, are now gone. So we need, my sources tell me, we need officials there who can address these issues, who can talk about the border wall, who can talk about security relationships, national security, migration, countering drug trafficking. These are important issues. There's few relationships as important as ours with Mexico.
I would agree with that 100%. And Franco, meanwhile, the U.S. is slapping more sanctions on Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro's inner circle. What are the consequences of all this?
It's a big deal. The Trump administration is trying harder and harder to up the pressure on the Venezuela government. They want a new leadership in Venezuela. They've thrown everything they can at them so far. They've slapped about more than 70 sanctions, including against the President Maduro, as you mentioned. Today, they issued more sanction against the First Lady of Venezuela. They've been going hard, but there are a lot of questions about what's next. Interestingly, after his speech where he mentioned Venezuela, Trump left open the door for military option and even seemed to encourage the military of Venezuela to do a coup against the government, saying that the military could overthrow the Venezuelan government if it wanted to, and said it would be easy. Pointed out, your viewers may remember that drone attack in Venezuela where some of the military at a parade in Caracas went scattering after the attacks. And he said, look, this is an example that there is no real military in Venezuela, unlike the United States.
What about Nicaragua? Does the U.S. now have a cohesive philosophy on approaching the issues, the very serious problems in Nicaragua?
There are very serious issues in Nicaragua. It is something that is a priority of the Trump administration, I'm told. Those in Nicaragua would probably like the Trump administration to act stronger and faster. The conditions there are in a similar fashion to Venezuela, but in some ways moving along faster. There have been more deaths per capita. The economy has certainly taken its hits. And the United States has issued some sanctions against Nicaragua, against certain leaders, and certain authorities, but it has yet to take the same concrete steps as it has Venezuela. Some feel like that's because so much of their attention is on Venezuela. The administration assures me that Nicaragua is a very strong priority. Ambassador Haley at the UN has brought it up even just recently. But we'll see, what steps they continue to take. And, look, the United States is limited in what they can do. They just can't go in there and remove.
Sure.
Well, they can, but there are a lot of consequences if you were to do that.
Sure. It's just the rhetoric regarding Venezuela sounds a lot more forceful than that focused on Nicaragua at this moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Franco Ordoñez in Washington, thank you so much for your expertise.